Today we're going to be programming our MR-2312. To start off, what we'll do is go into the menu. We'll need to access our passcode. By default, the passcode is 1111. Once that's entered in, we can press the Enter key, and that will give us our command menu prompt. From here, we can select to panel config. In order to configure the panel, we'll need to first short out JW5, remove the jumper, and just short out the two pins. Once the two pins are shorted out, it will produce a trouble. We can silence that trouble. It's just notifying us that we're in configuration mode. From here, we'll actually be able to access the panel config option. By selecting Enter again, it'll give me a trouble generated as I'm now in the config programming area. I can silence that. From here, I can select, say, my features. We'll start off with that. By selecting Enter, it'll go into the feature list. One of the first features that comes up is manual signal silence. If we select Enter, we can go into whether we want to configure it. By default, it has been selected as enabled. If we'd like to set it up as disabled, we'd hit the down cursor and then hit the left or right cursor to place the X. Once the X is hit, we can then go back, and now our manual signal silence will have been disabled. The next feature up would be our fire drill. Same with this, we can select Enter. By default, it has been enabled. If we like to disable the fire drill feature, we press down and then again one of the left or right cursors to apply the X. Once it's been applied and the desired enable or disable has been selected, we can go back. The next option would be our output circuit correlations. By selecting Enter, we'll go in whether we want to disable or again enable the output circuit operations. By default, it has been disabled. The next feature is the water sprinkler retard timer. Now with this, if we select Enter, we can have it as default has been disabled. If we'd like to enable that feature, we could press the up cursor and then the left or right arrow to apply the X. With the water reflow, if disabled, all the initiating circuits configured as water flow or sprinkler act as non-verified alarms. If enabled, retard operation is performed and initiating circuits configured as water flow or sprinkler. We exit and go back to the features again, down on the aux disconnect programming. If we select Enter on this, again, we can have it as defaulted, being enabled. Or if we press down, we can disable this feature as well. If enabled, the auxiliary alarm relay and all correlated relays are disconnected when you select aux disconnect. The next feature is signal silence inhibit timer. By selecting Enter, we can see that it has been disabled. If we scroll down, we can set to the desired time of 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, or 1 minute. Using the function to inhibit the signal silence switch for a desired length of time, this time period should expire before the signals may be silenced. Right, so if we wanted to select 1 minute, we apply the X. Now our signals would not be able to be silenced until the 1 minute has expired. The next feature is our aux disconnect, which disconnects common alarm relay and common supervisory relays. If we select Enter, by default it has been disabled. You can press the up cursor to enable it. If enabled, the common alarm relay and common supervisory relay, in addition to the aux alarm relay, are disconnected when you select aux disconnect. The MR-2300 series will not transmit a supervisory or alarm event. If disabled, selecting aux disconnect will have no effect on the common alarm relay and the common supervisory relay of the MR-2300 series panel. The next feature is the auto signal silence timer. By selecting Enter on the auto signal silence timer, we can have it as disabled, or we can scroll through and find the various time segments that we could set this for, whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, or 30 minutes. Use this function to determine the time period for which the indicating circuits will sound before they are automatically silenced. We can go back and go to the next feature. Next feature is the remote annunciator or smart relays. By selecting this, we can have the number of remote annunciators or relays. Right now, by default, is selected to none. We can then scroll through these to say that we either have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 remote annunciators. Once we've found the desired number of annunciators that we'll be adding in, we can hit the left or right cursor to apply the X. Once the X is applied, we can step out of that feature. The next feature is the silence alarm transmit. With this feature, if we press enter, by default, it has been disabled. We can enable it by pressing the up and the left or right cursor to apply the X. We use this function to allow the alarm transmit and auxiliary alarm relay to reset on signal silence rather than reset. Our next option is the AC power fail delay timer. By selecting this option, we can have it set for default, which is none, or we can scroll through for 1 hour delay, 2 hour delay, or 3 hour delay. Once the desired delay has been seen, we can press the left or right cursors to apply the X, and that will change the AC power fail delay timer. The next feature is the common supervisory relay. We select enter. By default, we see that it's been disabled. If we would like to enable it, we can hit the up cursor and hit the left or right arrows to enable the common supervisory relay. If enabled, the common supervisory relay behaves as a common alarm relay. If disabled, it behaves as a common supervisory relay. The next feature that we have is the signal isolator. By selecting signal isolator, we can see that by default, it has been selected to be disabled. If we would like to enable it, we can select the up arrow and then the left or right arrow to place the X if we chose to. With the signal isolator, enable this function only when the suite isolators are in use, and this is for Canada only. Our next feature is our strobe type. So if we select the strobe type, by default it's been selected as normal, but we can have either the Gentex, system sensor, Mircom, Faraday, or wheel lock selections. Once we've located the desired selection, we can hit the left or right cursor to apply the X and press enter. We'll use this menu to select the manufacturer of the strobes that we're using on the system. Our next feature is the signal rates. If we press enter, we can see by default temporal has been selected. If we hit the up or down cursor arrows, we can find other rates such as march time, continuous. If we scroll below temporal, we can then find California as well. Once we've seen the desired signal rate, we can hit the left or right cursor arrows to apply the X, and now that signal rate will be chosen. The next feature is the active EOL. So by default, it has been set up as disabled, but if we'd like to enable it, we can hit the up cursor and apply the X to the enabled. Enable this feature if using an active end-of-line resistor. If the MR-2300-A is used, this function should be enabled since the Class A converter has built-in active EOL resistors. In panel config, after features, we have input zones. If we select input zones, we can see a list of our initiating zones. On here we can see a list of 1 through 12 as we are using the MR-2312, so it allows us for 12 zones. Now with one of the zones, if we select, we can hit enter, and from here we can select what type of zone this zone will be. By default, it has been selected as a non-verified alarm, but we could have it set to a verified alarm, a sprinkler alarm, a water flow alarm, a non-latch supervisory, a latch supervisory, general alarm, building, or trouble only. Once the desired selection has been located, we can hit the left or right cursor arrows to select what we want. So if we wanted a verified alarm, hit the right cursor arrow, apply the X, and we hit enter. Zone 1 will now be notified as a verified alarm zone. The next option under panel config is our I3 zones. I3 zones are any zone that would be using the 2W-B or the 2WT-B. When we select I3 zones, it'll give us a list of the zones that we currently have in our system, so zone 1 through 12. With this, we'll be selecting which one of our input zones will have I3 devices. So if I hit the left or right cursor arrow, I can apply the X to zone 1, and zone 1 would be our I3 device zone. Just enter, and we can go back. The next feature under panel config is our output zones. With our output zones, we config our NAC circuits. So we have our indicating zones NAC 1, 2, 3, and 4. If we select one of these, we can decide what type of NAC circuit it will be. Will it be a silenceable, as selected by default, a non-silenceable, a silenceable strobe, or a non-silenceable strobe? Typically with our panels, more often than not, the selections will be a silenceable or a non-silenceable strobe, allowing for the manufacturer's sync rate to come through on the strobe circuits. Once the desired selection has been viewed, we can hit the left or right cursor arrows to apply the X, and then we can exit out of that NAC circuit. If we go back to the panel config, our next option down will be our correlations. With our correlations, if we hit enter, we can do our correlations for the list of our zones, so 1 through 12. If I hit enter on zone 1, I can see by default NAC 1 has been correlated to it, along with NAC 2, NAC 3, and NAC 4. If I wanted to remove one of these correlations, I could hit the left or right cursor arrow to remove the correlation to say NAC 4 and possibly NAC 3 as well. Once the desired NAC circuits have the appropriate X's applied, we can go back and adjust the correlations for other various zones. The next option under panel config would be our input zone labels. The input zone labels, if we hit enter, we'll have the list of our zones 1 through 12. If I hit enter on zone 1, I can then input my label. If we want to change the label for one of our zones, we'll select enter. Currently the label for this zone, zone 1, is just zone 1. If I wanted to change that to say first floor, I could hit the 1 cursor, hit the pound, shove my cursor over. For the S, I'll have to hit the 7 4 times. Hit my cursor over. For T, I'll hit the 8 twice, move my cursor over, leave a gap, and then I'll get the floor. For the F, I'll hit the 3 4 times, move my cursor over. For L, I'll hit 5 4 times, move my cursor over. For O, I'll hit 6 4 times, moving my cursor over again. I'll hit 6 4 times, move my cursor over again, and then finally with the R, hit my 7 3 times. Now I have my first floor label in. I can hit enter and go back. Now my zone 1 has been labeled first floor. The next option down in panel config is our output zone labels. So like our input zone labels, if we hit enter, we can see our NACs 1 through 4. And if we wanted to change the labeling on one of these NACs, we can select enter. We can see it's labeled as signal 1, but if we wanted to say change it to first floor signal or first floor signal, we'll hit the 1, cursor over, get the S in there, cursor over, followed by a T, cursor over, leave a space. We'll do a short form, the F 4 times on the 3, move my cursor over, L 4 times on the 5, move my cursor over, we'll leave a space, and we'll put a short form for signal, 4 times on the 7 for the S, move my cursor over, 4 times on the 4 for my I, move my cursor over, and then I can get 1 or 2 times on my G, on my 4 to get the G. Once we're happy with our label, we can hit enter, cancel, and move out, and that label would have been stored.